It is the 200th level. Mike Carpenter in the basement studio the day after Illinois' season ends to Kentucky in the second round of the NCAA tournament. And listen, we have to do a postmortem every year. There's one team every year that gets to have a celebratory end-of-season podcast because they won the national title. Every other team has to talk about why did it end? What didn't go right? Now, last year's postmortem, a little bit happier than the one that you're about to have or hear today, and that's understandable because that team had a march to remember, not just for them, but in the historical context of Illinois basketball. This team, I got to give them this. They were not boring. It was a really unique season and one that I can't really directly compare to any other Illini season that I've witnessed. And it was equal parts tantalizing. For when this team was good, they were very, very good. And frustrating, because when this team was bad, they were very, very bad. The average margin of defeat for this team was 13.6 points per game. The average margin of defeat, 13.6 points per game. The average margin of victory, I think somewhere north of 14 points per game. And when you look at the schedule, this is what was so fitting about losing in the way that you did to Kentucky. You lose by 9. It was the smallest margin of defeat for this team since January 30th at Nebraska. So I guess that's the good news. The bad news is that for about a month and a half when you lost, it was well upwards of double digits and sometimes as much as 43 and on the positive end of that spectrum, like 13 or 14. So a really confounding team in a variety of ways. Some of their inconsistency we could attribute to very easily explainable things. The youth, the inexperience. We could do that, and I think it's fair to acknowledge that this team had both of those factors at play. But boy, oh boy, the bipolar nature of this team and how they performed is something that was quite confounding as we watched it, and even in retrospect, I don't quite know what to make of this season. Now, one thing that I did notice when I was just kind of reflecting on how things have went since mid-November and looking at the ups and downs of this team, I think there was a line of demarcation that we can start with, and that would be the fact that this team was 12-3. 12-3 after a win at Oregon, where they were the talk of the college basketball world. And for good reason, because it was such a dominant win out there that it was hard not to dream big as an Illinois fan. National pundits saw the same things that we did. They were equally excited as to the potential of this Illini team, thinking, my God, that when this team's on, they're unstoppable. And really up to that point, this team had not had any of the dramatic valleys that we ended up seeing into mid-January, February, and then a few in March as well. So from 12-3 to 23-13. 12-3 in the first 15 and 10-10 in the last 20. Well, you could do worse, but you could also do better. And I think the interesting conversation to have here is the fact that we are operating under a context with Brad Underwood that is different than the context we would have for this program when he was hired. And that is a credit to him for what he has done, which is elevate the expectations of what Illinois basketball should be to making tournaments consistently, which he does, and you were not sweating it on Selection Sunday, and you're continually finishing in the top half, and apart from this year and 2 years ago, top 4 of the Big Ten. You're throwing a few banners up in the rafters, a couple of conference tournaments, 1 regular season championship, really probably should be 2, if not for Michigan skipping a couple games due to COVID. So there is tangible success that has raised the floor, and that is a credit to him. And of course, I appreciate that, and it should be heralded. It should be lauded. There's a reason he is handsomely compensated, and he deserves to be for much of what he's done. But to his credit, another thing that I appreciate about him, he's ambitious. And he talks about national titles being the goal. And I understand, there's 360 teams that will not be winning a national title this year, and only one that will be. So even for myself, I don't need national title to be the end-all, be-all of, is this program doing everything that it can? because there are plenty of other good programs that are lacking in that department as well. But what I thought was particularly frustrating this year is for all the bluster and all the swagger and confidence coming into the season, the teams somewhere along the way lost something in translation. Like something was amiss. Some wires got crossed, and I think it goes beyond the injuries and the illness. And as a coaching staff, they were not able to rectify it back to what we saw the first 2 months of the season. They were not able to adjust back into whatever was leading them to that 12-3 record, a top 10 ranking in the AP poll, Ken Pom and all the other metrics places saying this was a top 10 team. And then you finish rather unceremoniously in the second round, which is kind of becoming the norm for his teams with the exception of last year. So what it leaves you with is an acknowledgement that Brad Underwood is a successful coach. And by that measure alone, you would have to say he is a good to very good coach. You know, we had a conversation yesterday on YouTube during the game. Someone just quite point blank asked, is he a good coach? Or is Mark Pope, that was the question, is Mark Pope a better coach than Brad Underwood? And I would say that Brad Underwood has accomplished more. So I guess by that metric, he's a better coach. But in that game yesterday, or whenever you're listening to this, however many days removed from the Kentucky game you are, Mark Pope was the better coach in that game. And it might just be that he's a better X's and O's basketball tactician than Brad Underwood. So it is the weird holding two truths at the same time song and dance, where you hold the first truth being that things are so much better, thanks to Brad Underwood. But the other truth that is a little bit more difficult to broach, and what I don't particularly love doing, but cannot shake that pit in my stomach. What truly is your ceiling if all too often in the NCAA tournament, you're kind of laying eggs? And before we hit up the break, I do want to start with this because the loss to Kentucky was part of a trend of Brad Underwood's team, specifically in the second round, but we could have thrown the Arkansas first-round game in there a couple years ago as well. The Loyola game, the Houston game, Arkansas, we can throw that in there. This one, UConn was its own beast, but regardless, if you want to throw that in there as well, these were games that were never really that competitive when all was said and done. I understand that against Houston, you got it within a point, or maybe even tied it with 12 minutes to go, something like that. But Houston was in control of that game. Even a win like Chattanooga, you didn't play well, but you escaped by the skin of your teeth. Drexel, the 1 seed versus the 16 seed. I don't think anyone felt great after that performance. You just got the win because Drexel stunk. When I was really reflecting on Brad Underwood as a tournament coach, which is a big, big way that we measure coaches and their value. Fair or not, but I think that's the reality of it. It leaves you wanting. And so far in his career at Illinois, he has beaten one single-digit seeded team. And that's Iowa State. And that was a fantastic game start to finish. And he deserves as much credit for that as he deserves blame for any of the losses. But the problem is, those losses and the way in which you're losing them has started to mount to where, as we enter games against good teams in the NCAA tournament, there's not a whole heck of a lot of confidence. Before we get into the season at large, it's fair to say that the performance against Kentucky was not good enough. It just was not. It was a Kentucky team that was not at full strength. It was a Kentucky team that played well. But were they fantastic yesterday? Were they gangbusters against Illinois? It didn't feel that way. It felt more like a team 5 months into the season making so many of the mistakes that had doomed them, especially over the last 2 months. It felt like a team that had not progressed, but had in fact regressed to some level of just merely good when we saw stretches of fantastic basketball. Now, that happens, and it can happen, especially when you rely on youth, but it's another in a long line of March disappointments that will continue to linger until it doesn't. And you might ask, well, what would it take to really erase the stench of that? Well, the Elite Eight went a long way. It did. And it would be foolish of me and not fair of me to say that every year must be a Sweet 16 or bust. But the fact remains that through 8 years, Brad Underwood has made the second weekend once. In order to get to that second weekend, you did get some help. You played Duquesne. You smoked the crap out of him, so you did what you should. And I think they probably would have beaten BYU last year, too. That team was just on one at that moment. But it is the way that you're getting outclassed by the Loyolas and the Houstons and the Arkansas and now the Kentuckys in what was a favorable matchup. And Vegas thought so as well, and basketball fans of all stripes thought, oh man, this is a really interesting game. And somehow you played in such a way where it was not an interesting game. And at a certain point, frustration mounts. And it is fair to question how good of a tournament coach is he actually. I know it's a crapshoot. I know things happen. But the problem is Illinois, all too often in these losses in March, is not even putting themselves in a position late in the game for something interesting to actually happen. The games are decided far before that. And I don't feel like they need to be. So what's going on with that? Two truths. Brad Underwood's been very successful. The other truth, his record in March leaves you wanting, specifically the NCAA tournament. Because as Trevor so fairly pointed out in our text thread yesterday, this is the same coach that has won 2 Big Ten tournament titles. Okay, so he can go on a run in March in a single elimination tournament with not much time to prep for the next opponent. We've seen it in the Big Ten, but translating that to the field of 68 is just not quite working. And it feels like the Kentucky loss, part of a string of losses, is one that was a true missed opportunity. A missed opportunity for a team that so desperately could have used a signature moment that really elevated this from, that was okay, to, oh, wow, that was a good year. It was right there. It was teed up for them to really vault themselves and their perception amongst the fan base and how we view them in the historical context of this program. And instead, it ended with a whimper. And that's unfortunate. So, before we recap the whole season, I thought it fair to talk about really the elephant in the room, because this is bandied about on Twitter, on message boards, it's in conversations via text threads, it's what you might have been saying to some of the people you were watching the game with yesterday. It is not a question of, is Brad Underwood the right guy to lead Illinois? Because in so many ways he is. The question is, why does this continue to happen in this manner in March? And what can he do to fix it? All right, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, it is the 200 level, brought to you by Hamilton Walkers. Downtown Champaign, going to go with some friends on Wednesday to pay off a bet. Happy to do some of the best food and drinks in Champaign. We really appreciate Nathan and the staff for partnering up with us this year on the 200 level. That's Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign, steak, seafood, and spirits. Also got to thank Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. Give them a call at 217-841-4728. With the purchase of a new HVAC unit, they will give you a free hot water heater. That's a really good deal there going on right now from Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing. Also, it might be time to get that AC check scheduled. We're going to get ours scheduled here in the month of April. Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend, at 217-841-4728. Also got to thank Owen Builders LLC, online at owenbuildersllc.com. Luke and his staff, expert craftsmen, and also their customer service is what sets them apart from maybe some other contractors. They are very quick to get back to you with whatever your project needs may be. Go online and get a free quote today at owenbuildersllc.com. And finally, State Farm agent Brian Hansen, online at brianismyguy.com. Life, auto, home, business renters, you name it, Brian is my guy, and he can be your guy as well at brianismyguy.com. Champagne Showers Podcast Network, appreciate them and appreciate you. Again, not doing the video feed on this, but I will post the audio on YouTube as well, so we appreciate those that watch us up on that platform, and appreciate you that might just be doing the traditional podcasting route, which is still the majority of our listeners. So thank you for riding along with us this football and basketball season. And we're going to be around throughout the spring as the transfer portal opens up. It's already open. We're going to be following who they add and all the names that are being bandied about. Today's conversation, though, is going to be a little bit less about that and more about this season and trying to maybe make some sense of it. It's always a bit of a picking up the pieces situation when a season is over, and this is no exception. It just feels like there's a lot more pieces to pick up, and they're kind of like in jigsaw puzzle form, where we're trying to make sense of something that might not actually make a whole lot of sense in some ways. But let's kind of look back on this season, and I think it's okay to just kind of do the roundabout here with the individual players and just talk about them and what they brought to the table, and how they kind of fit into this larger puzzle that we're looking at. And I think so much of this season began and ended with Kasparas Jakučionis, who was someone that I and so many others were excited to get on board after Igor Denim. Well, regardless, the other European guy who ended up going to BYU. That was the first name bandied about in the offseason as a stud European guy to come in, be a lead dog for you. It actually worked out well because Kasparas had a better season objectively than Igor did. I think it's Igor. And Kasparas is objectively very, very good at the game of basketball. But I know that, Jeremy Werner posted this question to me last week before the tournament began when I hopped on the Illini Inquirer podcast, and he asked if I could recall an Illinois player that had fallen from universally loved and adored to basically becoming the bane of Illinois basketball fans' existence. Matthew Meyer might have been one such guy, but he didn't really ever ingratiate himself with the fans. It was just kind of his personality. It just didn't fit. Ugh, God, don't even want to really think about that. With Kasparas, I was as big of a KJ fan as one could be early on, just seeing the playmaking skills and basically this new shiny toy from Lithuania that was clearly an NBA talent and was making step-back threes and making moves and passes that were like a more polished Andre Curbelo freshman year. Like superstar Andre Curbelo from the outset. And as much as I loved Andre Curbelo that freshman year, I mean, man, by the end of that season, there was not a player on that team, Kofi included, that I was more excited for the future of Illinois basketball than Andre Curbelo. That was the guy, and I know he was for so many people. Kasparas kind of fell into that spot as well, I think, with Illini fans. We were waiting for the next amazing thing for him to do, and so often in November and December he did it. And then the injury happened, and he misses a game or two, and you lose to USC after you beat Penn State, and he comes back, and then you smoke Indiana. And while he wasn't perfect, it felt like all was right. And then the next 2 months happened. And at the end of the day, Kasparas was just far too unreliable down the stretch. And he was reckless with the ball. He wasn't making three-pointers at nearly the clip he was early in the season. And he was even missing some bunnies, too. It was a very peculiar case of someone not quite falling apart, because this guy damn near had a triple-double in his first NCAA tournament game, but in some ways looking like a shell of what they were early in the season. Whereas with freshmen, I guess some might hit a wall, so that would have certainly applied to him. But other guys, they kind of figure it out as the season goes along. I mean, to use the Curbelo analogy, he was a role player until he was really thrust into a more starting position later in the season. Then when Iowa went out with that facial injury at the hands of Matty Sissoko, or the elbows of Matty Sissoko, Andre Curbelo just took the reins and became a star. For some reason, Kasparas just fell off. And it was an unfortunate ending to what was an overall good year, well, very good year for any freshman. But as I thought Jeremy and Derek on their podcast today were talking about, and fairly so, you got your expectations for average Joe freshman, and you have your expectations for your alpha dog, your lead guy. And this is maybe a criticism one could levy towards Brad Underwood. When he got Kasparas and when we saw what he could do, it became very clear in the offseason this was going to be the focal point of this team. And that kind of bit you at the end because you had built this roster around the idea that Kaspar Siakachonis was going to be that dude. And he sometimes was. Don't forget the Arkansas game, the Missouri game. There was a late 3 against Purdue. I mean, the guy did have some moments, and you were a better team for having Kasparas. But towards the end of the year, that line between net positive and net negative got a little blurry for a guy that is so skilled and so talented. So when we look back at Kaspar Siakachonis and we think, well, what was that? What is this guy's legacy at Illinois? That's a fair question because he will be a one and done, a true one and done, which we haven't had ever. I mean, would Jeremy Richmond count? I mean, one and done for Illinois, that doesn't really happen. And yet, I was thinking this yesterday when talking with Kenton during some breaks, when Kasparas comes back and visits campus, which I would assume would happen because it seemed like a positive year for him. Of course, the crowd's going to cheer and applaud, but really, with what fervor? His legacy is going to be somewhat complicated by the fact that when it was good, it was so damn good. But man, he hurt you sometimes. And he hurt you yesterday. It was really as simple as this going into the weekend. If you get good Kasparas, you're making the Sweet 16. If you don't get good Kasparas in either one of those games, you won't. And I think good Kasparas completely changes the complexion of that Kentucky game, but you didn't get that. And by that point, the way this roster was constructed, and probably with Brad Underwood taking too long to say, okay, this isn't working for Kasparas, let's start running everything through Kylan or something, you know, I mean, we'll struggle too, and I know that didn't help Kasparas' case yesterday, but just an appropriate ending in a very unfortunate way for Kasparas only because of how frustrating it got down the stretch. So, hey, I like the guy. I liked watching him. But I also, as so many of us did, was driven nuts by some of his decision-making, which, freshman or not, could sometimes be so boneheaded for someone who seems to just have a really high basketball IQ, and then he does these head-shaking things that just don't need to be done. Put your team in a hole, give up easy buckets in transition to your opponent, which you couldn't afford against Kentucky. And before you know it, you look up at the scoreboard, you're down double digits because Kasparas, among others, just didn't have it. So for freshmen, yes, he was objectively great. For your superstar guy that you rely on, he wasn't when you needed him to be. That's where the legacy's complicated with him. Now, Will Riley, his legacy, I think, assuming he's one and done, is a little bit more secure because of how it ended. And isn't that how it so often happens? The way things end so often informs how we view somebody years later. I mean, this is a recent example. I love Ayo. For what he did for this program, Ayo deserves to have his jersey up in the rafters. He was the Pied Piper of sorts that got this thing going. But if you were to say, well, him or Terrence Shannon Jr., Terrence won games in March. Ayo didn't as much, and I know he was robbed of that his sophomore year, and that's not fair because that team maybe could have made a run. But the Loyola game looms large with Ayo's legacy. The Iowa State steal and slam looms large with Terrence Shannon Jr.'s. To me, that's actually one of those things where I say, yeah, Terrence. Not to mention Terrence's year was objectively better than Ayo's junior year. I mean, that's just how good as Ayo was his junior year, Terrence was just that freaking good as a senior. So Will Riley, the way he ended the year and injected some life into this team, I mean, that will stick, I think, and people will look back a little bit more fondly with him than Kasparas, and that's even including the struggles against Kentucky, because for some weird reason, Will coming on later makes him seem like less of a seasoned vet than Kasparas, despite the fact that they had equal amounts of D1 college experience coming in to this year. It's the fact that Kasparas was the dude early and slipped, and it was the fact that Will Riley kind of had a nut in December and early January, and then came on and turned out to be the guy for this team down the stretch. And hence, we'll look at him more fondly. That I don't know if that's right or wrong. It just seems like that's how it often happens when we kind of reflect on a player's career and what they meant to Illinois. So the one thing that you can't say about both of them, though, there is immense value in sending guys to the league. From a recruiting perspective, you can say, yeah, well, we already sent Terrence Shannon Jr. Look what he's doing. We already sent Iota Sumu. He's on a second contract. We're about to send 2 more guys in the first round. That is now a factory for NBA players, which means your ability to get talent is going to get that much easier. And Brad Underwood has no issues with that. I mean, that is an exciting thing going into an offseason. You're probably going to get dudes, and you very well might get NBA talent type of dudes. There's a long stretch of Illinois basketball where that wasn't the case. So, yeah, if you were to look back, and I don't think it's too flowery or, pie in the sky to do this, KJ and Will Riley's legacy ultimately is they were one-and-done players, and the legacy will be informed by what type of players come in as a result of their success here. No, not Final Four. No, not Big Ten title, but the fact that they were able to have productive, successful freshman years on the court, translate that immediately to first-round draft pick status. Hey, if you're a guy looking to play a year or two in college and you see that this Illinois program keeps sending dudes to the league, of course they're that much more attractive. So if that's what we're left with, that'll do. And now you just hope that translates to 1 or 2 and done guys that maybe as part of the collective, whatever that collective looks like the next few years, Brad Underwood, helps you make deeper runs in the tournament. So started with the 2 freshmen there, and I know Tomislav Ivicic, he's a freshman technically, or is he a sophomore according to eligibility based on his age? But regardless, Tomislav Ivicic is someone that I think if we were to look back on this year and the likelihood of him coming back, that is one that you can really hang your hat on, because this guy really, at the beginning and the end of the season, showed just how good he can be. With that blip in the middle, thanks to frickin' mono, Tommy was overall remarkably consistent, and he was good on both ends of the court. He is someone that you can build a core around. He is that type of dude. Is he a superstar? I don't know about that. Is he someone that has a skill set that makes it very difficult for the other team to defend him? Yes. And clearly a very well-liked guy. I mean, go back to the Indiana game. Remember him jawing at Luke Goody? I loved it. Tommy cares. He fights out there. He's a skilled dude, loved by his teammates, culture guy, like all the sort of intangible platitudes that you want to throw at him, you probably could, and they'd be accurate. So, if anything, you found this dude whose older brother was playing with Coach Cowell and Antigua last year. You bring him over, and we think, well, that's cool. You get a European big, and I'm hoping for maybe, 8, 9, 10 points a game, 6 rebounds. No, it was better than that. Tommy was very, very good. And he might be a preseason All-Big Ten first-team player coming into next season. Hell yeah, you build around that. You go down the list, you're Kylan Boswell returning home. What a finish for him. And now you feel like, okay, this guy that struggled for about a month there in late January, early February, he turned it around. And not only that, Kylan really seemed to adopt the role of the alpha dog, the leader on this team. It only helps the narrative, the fact that he is a Champaign-Urbana guy. So talk about endearing yourself to the fan base. Kylan Boswell entering next year is going to be the fan favorite. And the way that he played down the stretch, he has every reason for fans to adore the way that he plays. He played his ass off, including yesterday. The guy's a bulldog. He clearly had the body to be both an ace defender and someone that can get to the rim. I mean, I remember earlier this season, and maybe even a month and a half ago, we were still talking about the layups he kept missing. And then the last month, he's not missing layups. And he even started making a few threes. I mean, I know not at the clip you'd like him to, but he started making a few. But more than that, there was an intangible quality to what he was doing for the team when they needed it the most. And that is a credit to Kylan Boswell. And the guy will probably, do they do captains? I don't know if they still do that or not, but I would assume he would be the captain going into next season. So really cool to see a guy not just ingratiate himself with the team and the roster, but really take the reins when the team so desperately needed someone to do that. Love Kylan. One of the easiest guys to root for. I mean, we should have known this maybe all the way back at the Missouri game, which was one of his best of the year. He struggled from the field, but the guy kept driving to the rim and made free throw after free throw after free throw. Yes, he missed his last, which I think he finished 9 for 10 from the line that day. Bunch of rebounds. He got assist. Missouri misses the shot, you win the bragging rights game. Thank goodness you did. He was a huge reason for that, and he was a big reason you won the Purdue game. He was a big reason why you were able to regain some relevance in March after that terrible 3-game losing streak. And I would argue probably the most important reason why you were able to regain some of that relevance. Trey White, another veteran transfer. I'd say that worked out. I mean, there was that weird bump in the middle where he didn't even play in the Michigan State game at home. And not because of injury or illness. I mean, that was a DNP right there for reasons that I don't know if we'll ever quite become privy to. But Trey White, in the way that he finished the year and then the kind of gusto with which he spoke after the game yesterday, like, I'm fiery, man. I want to be back. I want to play tomorrow. Okay, I love that. I want him on my team. I really like a lot of what he can do on the court. He's good at almost everything. Maybe not great at any particular thing, but, I want him on my team. I want him in the starting 5. And then that leads to the other guy that you'd like to retain as well, and that's Morez Johnson. And things sound fairly optimistic on that front as far as retaining those 4 guys. And if you were to tell me going into the offseason that is your core 4 and you can build around that, I'm going to say you're going to have a very good team next year. And I don't know about Big Ten championship or anything like that, but you'll be experienced. These guys will have a camaraderie. They'll have a culture where whatever pieces you go out and get will have to fit to that culture, as opposed to a collection of 9, 10 new guys trying to figure it out on the fly. That will be established. And they can just focus on ball. And that, to me, is an exciting proposition after what we saw this year and the finicky nature of this team. Now, I think it is fair to question why, just by returning those 4, should we be so confident the next year is going to be that much better than this year? You're losing Will. You're losing KJ. I would not go so far as to say that's addition by subtraction, but I think that we're seeing across the board here, the teams that are still alive, with maybe the exception of Duke, have plenty of veterans on them. And Duke just has freaks of nature all around the court. But what a lot of these teams have done a great job of is mixing young phenoms with fifth-year dudes that have seen it all. So when Lamont Butler, as Brad Underwood pointed out yesterday, 13th NCAA tournament game, and at the same time he was bemoaning the lack of experience on his own team. Well, go get a guy who's a fifth-year player that's been in a few NCAA tournaments. Go get him. And you can couple young phenom or 2, whether that's Dame Sarr, the European guy, or who knows what other name might emerge, because names will emerge with Brad Underwood's recruiting abilities, with older dudes. And it will be really fun to see as they attack the portal. Okay, well, who are you attacking? Who are you targeting to come in and slot next to your core 4? Because I will take those 4. I'll take Kylan, Trey, Morez, and Tommy, and you get me a shooter. You give me a proven veteran shooter from a power 4 level at that 2 spot. I'm saying that's my starting 5. And then we go from there. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because some other guys on this team this year, boy, oh boy. Again, this was not a boring team. The narratives are all over the damn place, but let's start with one that, Benham Rickhouse. Where to begin? I tweeted during the Missouri game, this looks to have been a terrible misevaluation. It was. And as hard as he plays, as much as there were moments where Ben did really good things for you, I'll even go back to the Purdue game and shout him out for putting up a decent fight against Trey Kaufman-Renn when nobody else was. This is not the level of basketball for him. It didn't work. And there were far too many games where he was over, where he was a complete liability defensively, where he was invisible on a stat sheet. You did not pay him to be your 7th or 8th player. You did not. You paid him to be a focal point of your offense, and he was not. He never was. That is a bad miss from this coaching staff. Not a bad miss in terms of, can Benham Rickhouse play 15 minutes at this level and be okay? Yeah, he can. He's big enough. He's of course got a great shooting stroke. He just can't make enough of him. But that's not what they signed him to be. So it would be disingenuous to say he had a few good games, so therefore the return on the investment was A-okay. It wasn't. It wasn't good enough. and that is a miss. Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, probably gone. The body language, it was right there. 0 points in his last 8 games. 0 assists in his last 8 games. In the 1 minute he played yesterday, some of the most atrocious defense. I mean, just abysmal. He's gone, and it's a bummer because the guy's a bulldog, and he embodies a lot of the toughness that Brad Underwood purports to be such a purveyor of. And we're going to file that under, guy that didn't quite work out. RJ Melendez, see ya, Brandon Podjimski, I guess that was just 1 year. I mean, listen, guys transfer out. It happens. I've accepted it. Dre Gibbs Lawhorn will transfer out. He will find a spot probably at a little smaller school. Maybe, I think you put him in a mid-major, he goes nuts. He goes off. Just unleash the dragon, let him just go and just be the attack dog that he can be on the court. But Dre, for the promising moments he showed this year, boy, did he struggle down the stretch. And you don't know if it's a chicken or egg thing where he struggled because he knew it was over, or his struggles led to it being over. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it was something written on the wall about 3-4 weeks ago where he knew they don't really want me here, and then it just kind of feasted on itself, and then he became the sort of shell of himself that we saw in the last 3-4 weeks. That's unfortunate because when he had his moments this year, think about the dunk against Ohio State. Think about the month-long stretch where he was a double-digit scorer per game, and fizzled out. And he'll be gone. Jake Davis, nice little pickup. Like to keep him around if you could. I'd be totally fine with that. I know he had the rough stretch at the end of the first half yesterday defensively. He's a true sophomore, so I guess still technically young. First year at this level, but I thought he acclimated himself pretty well, and he can be a guy off the bench that you can trust for 12 minutes a game next year. Is he going to want to be that? I don't know. But is Jake Davis necessarily someone that a bunch of schools will come calling and say, we want you to play 30 minutes a game? I don't know about that. I would imagine he'd be back, and why the heck not? That's basically a roster this year because Kerry Booth is Kerry Booth. What the hell is that? He'll likely be gone, and that's okay. Ty Rodgers didn't play. Think about this. We go back to the first night of the season, find out that Ty Rodgers is redshirting, and I understand the argument. I understood it then. I was going to roll with it and say, yeah, we're moving in a direction where you need shooters on the court. But the problem is we didn't shoot that well this year. So could Ty Rodgers have helped you? Yeah, he could have. Would that have changed your offensive philosophy a little bit? Yeah, sure. And the offense, according to all metrics, was still pretty good despite not making a lot of threes, which is a credit to them. And I guess a credit to Tyler Underwood if he is in fact the architect of that offense. But when this team fell into that swoon, what intangible impact would a Ty Rodgers have had if he were on the court to maybe help stem that? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that because I legitimately don't know because he is offensively limited. But the guy is a gamer. And sometimes, again, there's just value in that. They don't need to all be stars. They don't need to all be 5-tool players. Sometimes you just need a dog. And Ty could be that, and he was not allowed to be that this year. I would assume he'd be gone. It'll be a bummer if that inevitably happens, and we'll see where he goes and wish him the best of luck. But that is, okay, you change your philosophy, and now he's not going to be part of your future plans. Okay, fine. But when you miss on a guy like Benham Rickhouse so extravagantly, or when you miss on a Kerry Booth who is going to be rotation piece, and I know Kerry Booth wasn't the explicit reason why Ty Rodgers redshirted this year, but he was yet another name that appeared to be in front of Ty Rodgers as far as minutes per game. I'm sure that a variety of factors went into Ty making that decision, probably in conjunction with the coaching staff, but you got these guys, and other than Kylan and Trey, the transfer class was just whatever. I mean, they didn't bring Kerry Booth in to be that bad, and he was. And they didn't bring Ben Rickhouse in to be your 7th or 8th option. They brought him in to be like your 3rd. And those misses really hindered this team, along with counting too much on freshmen, along with not being able to make threes to save your life. Just absolutely uncanny how this team could not put it into the net. And that's where you ended up at 23-13. Listen, I've seen worse teams. I have. But I don't think we need to fall into the trap of saying, well, it sucked with John Gross. Guys, that was a decade ago. Are we going to continue to say, yeah, late Weber and Gross was really bad? Well, no kidding. I lived it. Many of you did as well. The question is, in this reality that you're in right now, what can you do to maximize what this program can be? And if there are lessons to be learned from this team and the abrupt ending to a season that showed a lot of potential early and then just kind of fell off a bit, I mean, just how do you even describe it? I think there are lessons to glean from that, specifically get old, stay old, which is what Underwood did so successfully last season. And I think one other thing I'd throw in there as well when it comes to transfer portal stuff. You have the NIL funds to go get proven dudes from Power 4 level teams. Kerry Booth, while he was not brought in to be a star, was still brought in with some cash money to say, hey, Kerry, you're kind of sought after. You got size. You scored 6.5 points a game at Notre Dame. You could shoot a little bit from 3. Here you go. Come in. Be a guy for us. He wasn't. Ben Rickhouse, you're an absolute freak offensively. Come on in from Evansville. You made the jump from NAIA all the way to Division II, and now you're coming to Division I. Didn't work. Trey and Kylan, to an extent, did work. The problem is the lack of effectiveness, specifically from Rickhouse, really kind of screwed up whatever notions Brad Underwood had for this roster construction and why it was going to work. And it never fully did. So it's the freshman. It is Ben Rickhouse. And I don't say that in an accusatory way like, Ben, you stink. No, it's just the reality of the situation that he was not what you signed up for him to be. He was not the guy that you paid whatever 6-figure amount to be. And it is what makes these conversations a little bit more frank than when they were quote-unquote student athletes. These guys are getting paid big-time money. And according to Jeremy and Derek, and I knew that this Illini team was like top 12 NIL. That's been the widely reported thing. They mentioned on their podcast today, second highest budget in the Big Ten. Now, the first is Indiana, and Mike Woodson stinks as a coach, and they stunk as a team. So, yes, it can get worse, even with more money going into it. But, all that said, you see teams with less budget, like in Michigan State or a Purdue, still alive, mind you, or a Maryland, still alive. They made it work better than you did. So, what does that say going forward? Like, what concerns or what areas do we need to address as a program in order to fix that? I'll tell you one thing that needs to be fixed, because for 2 years it's been broken. The defense has been absolute crap. Way too much. The offense has been, I know it can make you pull your hair out, because it's like, well, what are the sets they're running? What is the offensive identity? Okay, I get it. It's an NBA offense, but you are scoring most of the time plenty of points. Most of the losses this year, when things got away from you, would be because you could not stop the opposing team. Kentucky scored on 13 of their first 17 second-half possessions. You are not going to win a game like that, no matter how good your offense is. You give up 13 baskets and 17 trips, you're going to lose. This defense stunk. 2 years in a row, it stunk. And even more vexing is for 2 years in a row, it started off in the first month or two being like top 10 efficiency. And then teams say, oh, okay, that's what it is. And then they figure it out. And then we don't truly adjust until it's too damn late. The defense has stunk. And if we're going to be a true threat come March, it can't. Yes, I know you made the Elite Eight last year. Yes, your defense was enough to win you that Iowa State game. 72-69, right? I mean, that was a good defensive effort. A yeoman's effort against an Iowa State team that, while they played a slow pace, still had some dudes. But with that lack of defensive consistency, you're up a creek. You are so hindering your ability to make runs in March if you just can't stop the other team. We saw a UConn team, undermanned compared to what Florida had talent-wise, take them to the limit. Why? Because of defense. And I don't think these two things are mutually exclusive. I don't think that a good offense negates your ability to have a good defense. Though the last 2 years, it has seemed to do just that. So if it's Zach Hamer and he's your defensive guru, okay, fine, fire him, whatever. And he probably shouldn't be in that position anyway. From a video coordinator to an assistant coach, seems like a bit of a jump. You need a defensive guru on the staff, a defensive coordinator, if you will. You need someone that actually knows what they're doing there. It can't be Zach Hamer. Now, I know a lot of fans, they're ticked off about Tyler Underwood because they feel like it reeks of nepotism. I understand that. I'm not entirely comfortable with it either. I would be lying if I said that overall my problem was with the offense because, again, they score quite often. They still score quite efficiently. But I would understand criticisms that say, well, when your one-on-one matchups are not in your favor, what do they have to fall back on offensively? I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know if Tyler does either. I also don't think optic-wise it's great to have your coach's son as a true assistant now, basically being the offensive coordinator. It would be ideal if Tyler Underwood were to get a bigger assistant role at a different school so he can go off on his own, learn the ropes of the profession, and then maybe make his way back here some point. But at the moment, I understand people's ick factor was seeing the coach's son on the sideline. Is he the main problem? Heck no. Is Zach Hamer the main problem? Heck no. And this is where when I get into conversations about coaching staff, I try to caution myself and say, whoa, wait a second. If I'm a Yankees fan and they aren't hitting, am I blaming the hitting coach or the GM that brought these hitters in the first place? I know the hitting coach is going to get axed. I know that that's the head that's going to roll. But who's really to blame? So when it comes to a defense that has been good enough, or an offense that, if the matchups aren't conducive, can really grow stagnant, am I blaming Zach Hamer and Tyler Underwood? Or am I blaming the $4.5 million coach that's been doing this for 30, damn near 40 years? And I think we need to be careful with that, thinking that merely changing things up on the staff is going to fix things. It's not just merely changing things up. It is identifying guys that can come in and help maximize what Underwood's doing here. And I would hope that Underwood, who has shown an ability to adapt and be flexible, I hope that he's willing to do so again because he needs to. He frankly needs to. Because here is the concern. You lost in the first weekend of the tournament again. The Loyola game looms large. Houston, hey, that's fine. Houston was really good. I don't really have a problem with that. Arkansas, whatever. UConn was UConn, but nonetheless, it was yet another NCAA tournament performance where you just kind of sucked. Call it what it is. We just sucked against Kentucky from the tip. Let's say that happens again next year. I remember the mid-90s with Lou Henson and knowing they weren't going to make a run in the tournament. And eventually, if you continue to do this, trends are what they are. And the perception is what it is. I mean, I don't right now have a lot of confidence in Brad Underwood. If you say right now, in March next year, he's going to play a team seated higher than them, and every metric out there is going to say that they're basically equal, and even Vegas is going to say that you should maybe win that game. Are you confident? It would be very difficult for me to say yes anymore. Listen, the loss to Kentucky was not Loyola, okay? It's not the debilitating kind of loss that was. It wasn't, oh man, you missed out on an opportunity to make a Final Four because you lost to 3-seeded Kentucky. It ain't that. It's the fact that you were outclassed that entire game. When anybody that had been paying attention knew that that was an upset ripe for the picking, and it would not have even been an upset. So in some ways, as we were texting about me, Trevor, and Isaac, we're trying to reckon with this ourselves in the text thread. And we woke up today, and honestly, the loss was even worse than it was when it happened. Just a lifeless, they played hard in the second half when they were down 16. Guys, it's what they're supposed to do. They're athletes. They're at a high level. They should damn well be playing hard. But it's the fact that they were just bad. Again, when it mattered the most. It was the fact that you had no answers, seemingly, for a Kentucky team that was undermanned by the roster they had constructed coming into this season. I mean, yes. Yeah. I'll use that word concern again. Not concern for, this program's going to stink under Brad Underwood, because frankly, it won't. And that's a props to him. And I'm happy to be at a level where we are making tournaments and not sweating it out. I'm not taking that for granted. But at the same time, as a fan base, I think it's fair to ask ourselves, well, as we go in the offseason, we go into next season. If Brad Underwood himself is saying that the expectations are this, but he's not coming close to matching them, how do we feel about it? And while I don't need a national title every year, I'll take one in my lifetime, that'd be great. I do want this team and this program to stop exiting March in sometimes embarrassing fashion. I'm not seeing all that many teams do that. Like when you got these fairly closely paired games, I know Iowa State got smoked by Ole Miss yesterday. Well, Iowa State, they're undermanned. And frankly, Ole Miss did Iowa State what I don't think Illinois would have beaten Kentucky like that. But I mean, that's a lot of the reason why Ole Miss, I think, was favored in that game. And I know that Illinois was favored against Kentucky. I mean, it was ripe for the picking. It was right there in front of everybody, and we just didn't go out there and take it. And frankly, I want Brad Underwood's teams in March to go out there and start taking the damn thing. No, I don't need Final Fours every year. I've only gotten 2 in my life and one that I remember. But I don't want to be the perpetual, like it was with Henson the last 6-7 years, like it was the Lon Kruger era, which was really good. And of course, I would have taken Lon Kruger when John Gross was here. But it's okay to ask for more too. And we also need to stop pretending that the reality we're living in is a college basketball that existed 10 years ago. That's not the case. This is semi-professional / just basically all-out professional basketball now, where you're operating with budgets and you're having to construct rosters on the fly, which Brad's done a pretty darn good job of. But while he's got a lot of that piece down and he doesn't often miss, my worry is that for this team to truly make hay, it either needs to be a generational talent like a Terrence Shannon Jr. or just a perfect storm of an offseason. And that Brad Underwood isn't quite as capable as maybe other coaches of maximizing what he has with that group. If coaches had a wins above replacement rating, in other words, if, in baseball, wins above replacement is how much better is this guy than your replacement level minor league player at that position? And, like a superstar hitter, Aaron Judge might be worth 7 or 8 wins a year above replacement, right? That's what a superstar guy is. I wonder with coaches, if there was a WAR rating, what Brad Underwood's would be. Because there are intangible things he does that I think are worth wins. But all too often when it comes to the individual games themselves, and you start playing them and they start unfolding a certain way, you just kind of feel like, oh, well, it's going the way that I worried that it would go. And there's no way out of it. And that's kind of a suffocating feeling. So I end this podcast and this reflection on this team, which in so many ways is a microcosm of the Brad Underwood era. Awesome highs and frustrating lows. And yet, even with those lows, you acknowledge, damn, I mean, if the low is a 6 seed and you make the tournament, you win a game, we'll take that. And I don't want this to be misconstrued here. Of course I'm taking that. I ain't firing Brad Underwood. I wouldn't want Brad Underwood to be fired. But I do want, in this sort of advantageous position he's in, again, if this is like if this is bottom for him, and it might well be for the next 5-6 years, then that's a great place to be. And you can really work wonders there with the budget and resources he has and his ability to be flexible. He can make changes, tangible changes, that will make us more of a threat in March and more of a threat to win that national title he keeps alluding to. But the 2024-25 Illini and how we remember them, I think, is going to be so much dictated by what happens next. 2022-23, we can laugh at. Why? Because the next year with Terrence Shannon Jr. and Coleman Hawkins and that Marcus Damas kid they brought in, they went to the Elite Eight. I would so love to look back on this year after we make a run next year with a more veteran team and they make some shrewd acquisitions in the offseason. I would so love after next year say, man, I know that last year, that was freaking bizarre. But you know what? It brought us Tommy and Kylan and Trey and Merez, and then it set us up for this year. If that's what it is, hey, we're golden. So in many ways, the 25 Illini, their story will still be written. And I think that is okay. I mean, that's sports. You know, I mean, we are constantly modifying our expectations, and narratives are constantly shifting. That's just what it is. And I react in real time, and I react the day after. And my thoughts, yes, they're subject to change, but I'll always try to tell you why they did. And I would love all too much for us to be able to reframe this conversation based on what next year's team does. And guess what? It starts now. It starts at the offseason. On Twitter today, I just kind of did a straw poll, so to speak, and asked people on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied were you with this team? And instead of going through some of these, and there were great individual answers, you can see the thread online here, but I mean, it runs the gamut, everybody. From 2 to 8. Now, I think that's actually an okay thing. I mean, if we were all homogenous in our responses here, then you're kind of getting into groupthink, and that's not good for any sports fandom. So it is showing that people went in the season with different expectations, and they came out of it with different feelings, and that's fine. I just know that if Brad Underwood is speaking so highly of what this program can accomplish, I tend to believe him, because I've seen this program get to those places before. The question is, what is he going to do this offseason to help us get closer to that? This is his ship. He's running it. Guess what? Still going to be going to games next year. I'm still going to be rooting for them every damn game that I watch. I might have micro questions about the guy, but I hope that he has the macro answers to really get this thing rolling beyond just, hey, 20-plus wins a year. That's an accomplishment. Top half of the Big Ten every year, no sweat. That's an accomplishment. These are baselines with which we can operate from that put us in a better position than most Big Ten schools, and that's awesome. And don't forget a rabid fan base that is pumping the money into this thing to make it work. All advantages. Will he take advantage of those advantages and get us to that next step? Hey, I think it can happen. I just think there's some hurdles in the way, and it'll be interesting to see how he addresses those. So that's what I got for this team and the state of the program right now. And this offseason, we're going to be back here on the 200 level, talking about names that they might be getting through the transfer portal. There'll be, announcements to the draft and people transferring out, and that will be basically what the next month is, as it has been since really the podcast got started and the transfer portal became the thing. So we'll be here every step of the way as news breaks. I want to thank you all for following along this football and basketball season. Football was an absolute blast. Basketball was not boring. It was not at all boring. That is for damn sure. And yeah, things got heated sometimes. But I'm going to react just like you do watching the games. I just got a microphone and I bloviate and I babble, sometimes to my detriment, but sometimes I'll be honest. I don't regret anything I've said about this team or about Brad Underwood. It is a very, very interesting story. I mean, this is a coach that's had a lot of success, and yet I don't remember Bill Self being talked about as much as this. So it's really a weird place to be in, where I think the fan base as a whole is like, hey, Brad's our guy, but there's a but there. The question, depending on the person who's saying it, is what font size is that but or however? Is it a 72-point font or is it like 12? Is it just, hey, I like Brad a lot. I just wish he'd do this. Or is it, Brad Underwood's our guy, but I got a lot of problems with him. I mean, it's going to depend on who you talk to. Where am I? Brad Underwood's the guy. He has flaws as any coach does. And I'm hoping he can identify those and fix them. I mean, that's fair, right? But he's pretty good the offseason. I mean, I'll say that. Like he's going to make this intriguing. We're going to be in a lot of names, I'm sure, that will keep this thing exciting. So thank you guys again for tuning in. Again, audio only today. I am posting this, the audio, at least on YouTube as well for people that consume it there. But before I get out of here, a reminder, Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign, steak, seafood, and spirits. Also, got to thank our friends at Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend at 217-841-4728. Owen Builders, LLC, online at owenbuildersllc.com. And State Farm agent Brian Hansen, online at brianismyguy.com. Appreciate Champagne Showers Podcast Network and appreciate you, the listener, and the YouTube viewer. We'll be back with video on whatever our next podcast may be, just audio for today. And the season's over. It stinks. I've been more heartbroken with other season conclusions before, but it still stinks to not have another game to look forward to. Frustrating as this team was, man, I thought they were going to win the Kentucky game. Man, I was excited at the prospect of having a week to look forward to the Sweet 16, and we just aren't going to get that. Such is life, and then you try again next year. That's sports, baby. But you know what? We're going to be here regardless. Where are we going to go? Give me a break, right? All right, everybody. We will see you soon as news breaks and unfolds in the transfer portal. Knowing this Illinois basketball program, there will be plenty of fodder to talk about the next month. It is the 200 level.